Hi everyone, Danny Katz here with CoPIRG, and today we're talking a bit about this very big decision that just came down or was coming down from the Public Utilities Commission about clean heat. And I'm here with Meera Fickling from Western Resource Advocates, who has been in the thick of it and is going to help explain a bit about why this is such a big decision and what that decision means. So thanks for joining me, Meera. Thanks for hopping on this call.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. Happy to be here.
So can you just place yourself within Western Resource Advocates? What's your position? What do you do there?
Yeah, I am the Building Decarbonization Manager at Western Resource Advocates. And so I manage our policy advocacy across our Western states aimed at reducing the greenhouse gas emissions that we produce when we burn fossil fuels in buildings. So as part of that, I've been doing a lot of work at the Colorado Public Utilities Commission on this thing called clean heat that we'll get to talk about today.
Great. And this is such an important issue, but it's not something that a lot of people wake up in the morning and go, "I'm going to be a utility reformer or advocate." I mean, how did you wind up working in this space? Why is this important to you to be doing work to in this utility space?
Yeah, so I got into this work for the reason that you might expect. I'm concerned about climate change. It's something that I think, we've been living out in Colorado as long as I've been there over the past 5 years. Seeing increased wildfires, the Marshall Fire, reduced snowpack, more extreme heat. All of these things that we are experiencing in our personal lives that just really drive home the urgency of mitigating climate change. Why work with utilities? Well, utilities aren't the only leverage point to reduce climate emissions, but they're a very important leverage point. They provide a lot of the energy that we use at home, whether it's electricity or natural gas. And it's abundantly clear that if we're going to reduce our emissions to zero or near zero by mid-century, utilities can't wait to start planning that transition. They have to start now.
Absolutely. And so you kind of hit on what the problem is here, which is just we have lots of buildings in Colorado, and so many of them rely on gas, especially for the heating component of the buildings, of the facilities. Can you help underscore sort of how many buildings or how big a problem is this, and why is that a problem that gas is a big part of the heat system?
Yeah, so most of us use gas in our homes. According to the US Energy Information Administration, which collects statistics about this, about three-quarters of Coloradans use gas as their main heating fuel at home. And similarly, about three-quarters of Coloradans use gas to heat our water as well. So overall, burning fossil fuels in buildings, and again, that's primarily gas, and primarily for space heating and water heating, contributes about 10% of our statewide greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not the biggest emitting sector in the state, but it is still a significant problem.
Absolutely. And what's so frustrating is we actually have the technology to be able to heat our homes without having to rely on this dirtier fossil fuel. And so I guess the good news in this is that there are solutions. There are ways to have what we call clean heat. And a lot of the technologies are actually technologies that's been around for a long time, but are now just really kind of coming to the forefront in terms of being able to replace gas furnaces or provide electric water heaters. Can you talk a little bit about these technologies, things like heat pumps and just efficiencies, weatherization, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so cold climate heat pump technology, that's the kind of heat pump that we need along the Front Range in Colorado, which does get cold, has come a long way in the past couple decades. So for example, one of the models that's prominently sold along Colorado's Front Range, the Mitsubishi Hyper heat pump, can provide useful heat down to minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty cold. That's about as cold as it gets in that area. And we've really gotten to test this out in Colorado over the past few years as we've had a number of really bad cold snaps. So for example, there's a local contractor, Elephant Energy, that published a white paper on the cold snap that we had in December 2022, where temperatures in the Denver area reached -18 degrees Fahrenheit, in some places -24 degrees Fahrenheit.
I
And
remember
what they
that.
found is, yeah, yeah. And what they found is that these appliances really did hold up. So they used sensor data to measure the input and output temperatures into the air handler, and found that these heat pumps were holding a set point even when temperatures got really, really cold. So heat pumps, they do in fact work, and they've come a long way.
Absolutely. It's interesting too, because I remember when I started working in this space a few years ago, I didn't know many people who had heat pumps, but just in the last few years, there's a lot of people. I think folks would be surprised how many people they may know who actually have converted to an electric heat pump or an electric water heater. So definitely a technology that's here. Okay, so then there was a bill at the legislature that said, okay, we've got this problem with so much gas in our buildings. We've got solutions, technologies like heat pumps. So there was a bill that required action by utilities in our state. Can you talk a little bit about what that bill was and what it required?
Yeah, so it sounds like you're talking about the Clean Heat Law, which the Colorado legislature passed in 2021. And that law requires the investor-owned gas utilities in our state, of which Xcel is the largest, to reduce emissions from distribution and end-use combustion of natural gas that they sell to residential and commercial buildings by 22%, from 2015 levels by 2030. And there are a number of ways that the law says that they can do this. So one way is electrification, which is converting space and water heating from gas to electric. This is, the heat pump technology, basically, that we were talking about earlier. There's energy efficiency. So, for example, adding more insulation or installing more efficient windows. That's another way to reduce demand for gas and reduce emissions. And then there are certain fuels that the law says can be substituted for natural gas that the utilities can blend into their gas supply, namely renewable natural gas and green hydrogen to reduce emissions. And the law is technology neutral. It's agnostic as to which measures the utilities use to meet their greenhouse gas targets, but the law does set some guardrails to make sure that the utilities plans are cost effective. And that's really important because, ultimately, as we'll talk about, the PUC agreed with us that electrification and efficiency are the most cost effective ways to reduce greenhouse gases in buildings.
Absolutely. Okay, so legislature says utilities, you need to do this. In our state, I think many people know, but I'll just say it. There's this Public Utilities Commission. The Public Utilities Commission is set up because right now, utilities are not exactly something we can shop around for. Your utility is based on where you live, where you work. And so the Public Utilities Commission oversees these utilities, especially investor-owned utilities or for-profit utilities, and they make sure that any plans or proposals have to go through their process and be approved. And so it sounds like the state law said, Xcel, you need to go before the Public Utilities Commission, you need to propose this clean heat plan. I know we'll talk a little bit about the process. It's been a long process, but I guess you all didn't wait to just see what Xcel proposed. You all put together a report, concepts of what would be the best sort of clean heat plan for Coloradans, for ratepayers. What were your main recommendations? What did you think this plan should really focus in on?
Yeah. So first, zooming out to the challenge that Xcel and other gas utilities in the state face. So Xcel's retail gas sales, and accordingly, its greenhouse gas emissions have actually grown by about 10% since 2015, which is the baseline year for the clean heat standard. And that means that reducing emissions by 22% by 2030 not only requires them to reverse course, from that growth, but then also reduce emissions by about 30% from today's levels. So that 22% reduction actually means more like a 30% reduction from where they are today.
So it's an ambitious bar to set.
Yeah, that's really ambitious. So like I said, we did find that by far the most effective and least expensive way they have to do this is through efficiency and electrification. And that's much more cost effective than using alternative fuels like renewable natural gas and hydrogen, which do have some significant limitations that we can talk about. The challenge is that for these efficiency and electrification measures, really what you need is a bunch of individuals to install heat pumps, to install insulation, and they have to decide to do that. They have to decide to buy the appliances. And the market for those technologies is very nascent in Colorado. So, we've had success scaling up heat pumps already, but from a pretty low baseline. So, for example, in 2023, Xcel deployed incentives for almost 3,000 heat pumps. And that's a lot of heat pumps. But for reference, both our modeling and theirs found that we would need to deploy at least 350 to 400,000 heat pumps to meet the 2030 clean heat target. So what we really need is a large-scale market transformation away from gas and towards heat pumps in order to be able to meet our emissions goals.
Okay, so your main recommendations and focuses, and I know this was a joint report with a few other groups, was about making sure that the focus was on heat pumps and efficiencies, weatherization. So then Xcel came forward with their proposal, and they, I think, put more emphasis in a few other areas, and you were mentioning we were going to talk a little bit more about those. So why don't you say kind of what was the ultimate proposal they put forward, and how did it differ from what your recommendations were?
Yeah, so Xcel started with what they called a Clean Heat Plus plan. So remember that we talked about four main resources that the law allows the utilities to use to meet the target. There's efficiency, there's electrification, and then there's clean fuels like renewable natural gas and green hydrogen. Well, the Clean Heat Plus plan added some additional resources that aren't allowed by the law, namely something called certified natural gas and carbon offsets. So in addition to those four clean heat resources, about a third of the emissions reductions that they proposed were supposed to come from certified gas and offsets. And that's problematic because neither of those actually reduces emissions from burning gas.
Yeah, it's certified natural gas. Just describe that just a little bit more. What did that mean?
Yeah, certainly. So the best analogy I've heard for certified gas is that it's like low tar cigarettes. Maybe it's a little bit better, but it's not exactly something that you want to be burning and releasing either into your lungs or into the atmosphere.
Yeah, still a cigarette.
Right. Still a cigarette, or in this case, it's still natural gas.
Yeah.
So certified gas has been certified usually by an unregulated third party to reduce methane leaks upstream during the production and transportation in pipelines. But it's still fossil gas. When you burn it in your appliances, it still releases CO2, it still releases pollutants like NOx, et cetera, because it's natural gas. And so that's why certified gas isn't included in the clean heat standard, and it doesn't comply with the law because it doesn't actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions from burning it in your appliances.
Gotcha. And then I also heard that some of the Xcel's original plan also emphasized a bit more on hydrogen and some of these other pieces that weren't things that you all were recommending as kind of main focuses. Can you describe a little bit how does hydrogen, what is hydrogen in this context, in the clean heat context, and how does it work?
Yeah, there are two main issues with hydrogen. One that is just that it's really expensive. But the other is that it's challenging to blend into the pipelines that serve a residential and commercial buildings. So there are various studies showing that the maximum blend that distribution pipes can accommodate is anywhere between 5% and 20% by volume before you run a risk of explosions, which would be really bad, or leaks, which would also be bad. And so higher volumes, like higher than 5%, 10%, can also require retrofits to pipelines. It can require retrofits to appliances. And while 20% by volume may sound like a lot, hydrogen actually has a much lower energy content per unit volume than natural gas. So that 5% to 20% maximum blend by volume actually represents a 1.5% to 7% volume, or 7% blend, excuse me, by energy. And again, that's if you max out the potential of these pipelines to safely carry that fuel. So really the maximum emissions reductions that you're going to get from hydrogen is just 1.5% to 7% at max, which is not a lot when you consider the scale of the problem.
Absolutely. And you've said something a couple of times, cost effective. And one thing that I know from my perspective as a consumer advocate group, we really see huge benefits in this transition to a cleaner heat system by also being able to not have to rely on gas to fuel our homes and businesses, to heat our homes and businesses, partly because, as you mentioned before, it's volatile, but it can be dangerous. I mean, there's a reason we have detectors in our homes. There's a lot of money and infrastructure that needs to go into place. So we're already paying for an electric grid. If you can move away from gas furnaces to electric heat pumps and water heaters, that allows us to then not have to maintain that gas system, which can be expensive because it's dangerous. That gets huge consumer benefits when we no longer have to maintain two different systems. And I see a lot of benefits for consumers in the long run moving in this direction, as well as just being able to have to remove yourselves from being reliant on these gas prices, which can shoot up like they did, a winter, last 2 winters ago. And so it does feel like there's a real cost-effective piece to this to just get off of having to maintain that gas infrastructure. And it sounds like hydrogen would require that same gas infrastructure with the same risks there. So it doesn't seem like it might have as much cost-effective impact on that as well. So I don't know if you wanted to talk any more about kind of cost effectiveness.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So what you point to is a kind of parallel problem to the emissions problem with natural gas, which is that we are investing. Xcel, for example, invests about $500 million per year into its natural gas infrastructure, and that's both extensions to new developments. It's expanding its pipeline capacity. It's replacing old pipes for safety and reliability reasons, and that increases rates for customers. So since 2019, base rates, the rates that we pay to pay off those infrastructure investments have just about doubled. And that's on top of the commodity price fluctuations that you also pointed to. And so those are investments that we pay off over an average of 60 years. When we invest into pipeline infrastructure today, we're going to be paying that off in like 2080. So this is a parallel problem that we really need to draw down that gas pipeline infrastructure, especially if over the long run the plan is to convert to electrification, convert to from natural gas to electricity.
Absolutely, yeah. Why be spending new dollars to build new gas infrastructure if that is going to take 60 years to pay off, when really in the next 10 to 15 years we should be to a system that's much more electric to begin with. So yeah, it does seem like important. There's an urgency behind getting this right early on. Any dollar we spend now can kind of lock us into that system for many years, it seems like.
Exactly. And hydrogen really, it not only prolongs that problem, but actually exacerbates it, because to get hydrogen from a production site to the city gate, for example, the city gate being the start of a natural gas utilities distribution system, you have to build dedicated pipelines. And that is yet more infrastructure that you're investing in for a fuel that is not scalable.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump ahead. So we started this conversation by saying there was a big decision, and we're kind of in the middle of this big decision. So the Public Utilities Commission, for folks who don't know, the way they make decisions, they heard from Xcel, they heard from advocates like yourself and many others who weighed in from the public. I know we got thousands of petitions generated, and others they took all this information and they've made a decision. Now, I guess the hard part is we're in the middle of that decision-making process. So they've talked out what that decision will be. So I know that some of the basic concepts. We're still waiting for the official written decision that will really spell it out. But I think you can say with some certainty what the broad brush concepts are going to be. And so can you just sort of say where did this ultimately land? What is the main focuses we expect on this clean heat plan that will be approved?
Yeah, in my opinion, and based on the commission deliberations, I think the final plan is a significant win for the climate and for affordable energy in Colorado. So the total budget that the PUC approved for clean heat resources is around $440 million over about 3.5 years, from 2024 to 2027. That total amount is about what Xcel requested to spend in that time frame in its preferred portfolio, but the difference is that the vast majority of the money that the commission approved is to be focused on electrification and efficiency, with a very small portion, around $10 million, allocated to renewable natural gas. So just to give a sense of the scale of those investments, the Federal Inflation Reduction Act's Home Energy Rebate Program allocated $140 billion for efficiency and electrification in Colorado. So this clean heat budget is over 3 times as big and leverages that funding to scale the market for heat pumps. The commission also agreed with our recommendations on some of those alternative fuels that we talked about. So the commission agreed that hydrogen should not be approved as part of the budget, and also rejected the company's request to recover the cost of certified gas, and agreed with a lot of our arguments around the emissions accounting issues, et cetera, with certified gas. So, in other words, to sum up, the commission approved a budget that is directed at the right resources, that can scale to meet our climate challenge and also save Coloradans money on heating. And it's substantial enough, I think, to transform the market for heat pumps in Colorado, which is what we really need to do.
That's great. And so for somebody who's an actual Xcel customer, what does this mean? $440 million, it's a lot of money. How will an individual experience this? Is it, as an Xcel customer, you'll get something in the mail that says, good news, there's a new rebate on a heat pump and it'll make it cheaper and easier for them to convert? Or is it more training for installers? I know some of those details we won't fully know for a little bit, but I guess how would you, how do you expect this will impact individuals who are Xcel customers?
Yeah, so it's going to be all of the above. There's going to be obviously a huge piece that is rebates for Xcel Colorado customers. There's going to have to be workforce development. We anticipate financing to be a piece of this as well. But that's all actually a next step that still needs to be finished, because the clean heat decision approves overall budgets and targets for clean heat resources, but the details of exactly how Xcel is going to deploy that money, that is something that still needs to be decided. So after the commission issues its written decision, Xcel is going to come back and propose to the commission exactly what rebates it's going to offer for heat pumps, what rebates it's going to offer for heat pump water heaters, how it's going to deploy those programs, et cetera. So that process should take about 90 days following the decision, after which we should know more about exactly what assistance will be available to Xcel's customers to purchase these appliances going forward.
Okay, great. So that gives us some sense. Okay, so for the next, roughly 3 to 4 months from now, we'll have more details on exactly how this will be rolled out, and that'll be a plan that will be in place for about 3 years. Ultimately, though, this is also just a big deal nationally. Even though this is Xcel in Colorado, this is a plan here. Can you just put us into context, like how leading is this clean heat plan in Colorado?
It is nation leading. So Colorado was the first state in the nation to pass a clean heat standard, and Xcel is the first utility in Colorado to propose and have approved a clean heat plan. So this is really precedent setting, and I think we're going to get a lot of lessons learned from implementing this plan that can be applied to other utilities in Colorado, as well as other utilities in other states nationwide that have adopted these.
That's great. And you used the word transformational earlier. I also understand like there's a ton of federal money coming in. There's some state money coming in to all support these different sorts of rebates and tax credits. And so it feels like this is this is this is an opportunity, a transformational opportunity, because not only will Xcel have this plan, but there are other tax credits and financial incentives out there, and we'll work to make sure we put links to some of the ways that people can take advantage of all of that. But the timing, it seems like, couldn't have been better to get something like this of this size and scope, to help us transform into this kind of cleaner heat system that's going to help customers in the long run.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's the right plan at the right time as federal Inflation Reduction Act money is coming online, as DOE, for example, is pursuing you know, market transformation challenges for cold climate heat pumps. And as we're building the market for these appliances, not just in Colorado, but also in states across the across the country, excuse me, as a result of these programs. So it really takes advantage of and leverages what's going on nationwide.
That's great. Any final thoughts before we wrap up here? Anything else that I didn't ask or we missed on this topic?
Well, I guess I'll just say overall, we really applaud what the Public Utilities Commission is doing here. It really is nation leading, and I think based on the deliberations, they're really trying to think holistically about this challenge of that we talked about, of reducing emissions and then also making sure that utility investments are aligned with the transformation that we have to make. So to give an example that we haven't talked about, one of the pieces of the deliberations was regarding new construction, where the commission not only approved a proposed pilot for all electric new construction, but actually expanded it significantly from what Xcel had originally proposed. And this is aimed at not just directing electrification to where it is most cost effective, and it is cost effective in new construction, but also trying to stem the tide of these gas pipeline investments that we talked about, and ensure that when we're building new developments, that we're not building gas pipeline infrastructure out to them, which is ultimately what we need to do to make sure that we're not investing in pipeline assets that can be stranded 50, 60 years.
Absolutely. And again, timing couldn't be better because we have these technologies. We don't have to rely on this dirty form of fuel that creates pollution, not just in our homes and in our communities, but for the whole planet. And so it does feel like now is such an important time to move away. We don't need to rely on them. Especially when it comes to gas, there's some volatile prices there. And so really important to be moving forward. And this seems like, a real transformational opportunity. So this is great. So we'll put some more, I'll make sure we link to some of the report we referenced earlier that you all put together, and some of the information about tax credits. So if you're watching at home, I'll work to get some of that information out to everyone. And over the next 90 days, we'll see what the details are for this plan and go from there. So thank you so much, Meera, for joining me today and talking us through this very important decision that is coming down from the Public Utilities Commission.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.